So far as I'm gathering, the issue is people are a problem. I'm Ray Myers. Welcome to Craft versus Cruft. And we are live from Missouri Startup Weekend, implementing a project with my new friend, Lucia. Would you introduce yourself?
My name is Lucia. I am in the energy management space, but I also do regulatory consulting, and I have a long history of policy and policy reform activism.
So, after my extremely esoteric pitch for the, community around building open source coding AI didn't get selected for this round, I decided to explore your team, BallotPedia, as it came to be called. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about that original idea and how you came up with it? What made you want to work on that based on your background?
So I was actually I was inspired by one of my girlfriends who I was having a conversation with about the next election, and we were talking fairly openly about who we were going to vote for, who we weren't going to. And she told me that she was probably just going to vote for blank because they were going to do blank thing. And I was a little bit taken aback by that, to be honest, because she wasn't kind of like a profile type that I would have imagined in that particular platform camp. Not that that's a problem, but it kind of got me thinking a little bit about the origin of the problem, which is voter education. And people understanding what is on their ballots and understanding what it means, to pursue certain legislation with certain candidates. And that really changes the dynamic of how our election results impact our democracy. So if you have a highly educated voter population that is voting for their own interest on issues that they care about, that's important to them, you're going to get a true representation of what a country needs. Whereas if you get a voter representation that is predominantly people who have been persuaded one way or the other due to propaganda or media bias, now you're in a media war, and it has nothing to do with the issues, and it has nothing to do with what people actually need. And that's kind of where we get that terminology, people voting against their own interests. Mm-hmm. You get a large population of individuals who might believe very strongly in one political camp, but that doesn't solve their problems. And when we don't solve problems, then we create bigger problems, and we create like a deeper divide between peoples, and we create like a continuation of this tribalism that we've been seeing in our politics.
Yeah, so a lot of my audience, they build software. Mm-hmm. So you saw that problem. You thought it should be possible to resolve that conflict, or evaporate that conflict, as we might say in theory of constraints, to tie back to my previous episode with Karl Perry. You specifically thought you can solve it with software. Mm-hmm. So is that the first time you've had what you call like a software idea, an idea for a software project? What was that like?
It wasn't the first time I've had that idea. I mean, I am a believer in technology. I'm also a data nerd. So for me, the opportunity with data is endless, because data itself can tell whatever story you want it to tell. Mm-hmm. But it can also be its own story. And that's unique from any other media source that we have when we're talking about political campaigning or elections, because it's not subjective. It's about what the issue is, what the impact is, and what are the elements that we need to qualify that in order to be able to continue to claim that it is objective and not subjective. And that really comes back to technology and the way that we're implementing a tool or a resource that's going to pull out the needs of the people and distinguish that in a way that is not campaigning for one candidate over the other.
Yeah, so it's not just, that technology just comes along and fixes the problem, but like what I really enjoyed about working with you on product design was you had really actionable specific ways in which the technology could sort of hook into the domain knowledge about what, constitutes a fair impact summary of a piece of legislation, for example. It's not just you sprinkle some AI on it. It's, AI was involved, but in kind of a very judicious way. So what did you learn over the course of working on this project with this team, that became two teams merged together halfway through?
Honestly, I loved our team, and I thought that we had a really great concept, and we put a lot of really cool different elements together. I think we had the wrong audience, which, that was a learning lesson as well. This was my first pitch. But I think that the power of software and the power of using data, if you're trying to use it to be representative of people with different beliefs and different subjective natures, really comes down to standardization. So how are you expressing that information? And that was part of what our platform was doing, is it was taking bill legislation, it was identifying 4 key factors that we believed would have the greatest impact on the individual so that they were better educated on how legislation was going to inform their own decision making. It had nothing to do with what you liked or what you thought was, a good idea or a bad idea, or, what religion you subscribe to. It was really just about, these are the facts. We're looking for the same facts in every piece of legislation. Doesn't matter who's putting it out there. And that's something that we can compare apples to apples now and say, this legislation serves me or it doesn't. Whereas if you're trying to look at it through a subjective lens, it's much more difficult to do that, because you end up comparing apples to oranges, and you have to make judgment calls on whether or not you believe more strongly or less strongly about something based on the nature of the beast, as opposed to the data and the information that you're gleaning from it.
So a lot of people would say, like, well, you can't do this or that objectively. You can't summarize an issue objectively. Like, it's almost a thought-terminating cliche. I think there was a really critical assumption challenging that you engaged in. I wonder if you have any thoughts on, you sort of talked about how you do it, with a lot of domain knowledge and patience is how you did it. But also,
or you did it.
we did it, it's how it should be, in terms of coming up with resistance, because you've had this idea for a while, confronting resistance, people thinking, well, I just have this sort of, household knowledge that this is something you can't solve. Do you have experience with that?
I think that when we talk about whether or not something is objective or subjective, especially when it relates to data, there is an element, whether consciously or not, that is interpreting a linguistic schedule, and it's interpreting, the way we're positioning something. And I could say something in 2 very different ways and give you the same information, and it would persuade you one way or a different way. And the advantage of using something like AI is that it is using the most common or the standard language that is written in legalese, for the most part, when we're talking about legislation, to really kind of hone in on the core of the information that I'm trying to get out of it. And it kind of resists that temptation to be polarizing or to be influential in the way that they're presenting that information. Also, by using the 4 different positions that we did, which are very quantifiable, we can use numbers, and numbers are a little bit more difficult to say. Numbers don't have opinions. Numbers are just numbers. So, if we're comparing numbers to numbers, how can you say that one is a subjective number?
Well, don't people lie with numbers all the time?
Yes, of course they do. But they're telling a story with those numbers, and it's the linguistics and the way that you phrase it, and it's the way that you use those numbers that tells the story, or that differentiates it or makes it different. If you're not telling a story, and you're not an individual or a human being that is taking that number and putting it into a phrase format that is persuasive in some manner, you do have a more objective opportunity by using something that doesn't think, doesn't have feelings, and is guaranteed to be objective in the way that it's pulling information, because it's pulling it from a commonality. It's not pulling it based on how the user feels about it, unless you program it that way. But the intent would not be to program it that way.
Yeah, it's not just that you're using numbers and indeed that you're using AI, but you're using these things very judiciously in a way that you've made sure you understand. And that's what really I enjoyed about this because, as people who watch my channel know, I've spent a lot of time over the last year trying to figure out how do we use AI in ways that we can predict and understand to the degrees of tolerance that we're comfortable with. How do we know exactly what we're buying? So I think this was an opportunity to, bring that really for the first time into someone else's domain. It was invigorating to kind of be able to, apply some of the principles I've been trying to shape. With Mender.AI, to see that meet someone else's vision who also wanted those same things, who also, needed in their domain to maintain a high level of trust when they were using AI. Not just use AI because investors want us to use AI or something like that.
Sure.
So what's next for you?
Even though we didn't win, I did get really positive feedback from the proposition that we proposed, and there's a few people that are interested in continuing on the project. And I still think that there is a huge value proposition to being able to offer something to people that gives them the opportunity. Really, it's giving them the opportunity to change their mind. And that's not something that we give them with media, and that's not something that we give them with social networks, and it's not something that we give them with familial referral. Because we are indoctrinating people into a belief system when we are sharing our opinions. In this, we're telling them about their needs because they're telling us about their needs via the first element of that customer survey or that customer database. We're using AI to pair that customer input against the data that we are objectively, to the extent that we can, pulling from this legislation. So to me, it's possibly, and I'm sure that there's other brilliant people out there with amazing ideas, but in my mind, I can't think of another way of supporting people or empowering people to change their minds about issues that they feel strongly about, even if they're against their interests, because it's something that they misunderstand or it's something that is not well conceived.
That was an excellent explanation. Thank you. And on this channel, one of the main things we do is give advice to software engineers. Now, I'm going to put you on the spot on this one because you're not as accustomed to doing that. But in whatever way this makes sense for you, what advice do you have for software engineers?
So I haven't worked with a lot of software engineers before, but I have worked with a lot of energy engineers before. And I think
that'll probably apply.
Without saying that you're all the same, engineers are very tactical, and they have really, really strong understanding of their subject matter and the way that they're building something from a technical discipline. My experience has been there is a struggle in understanding the overall intention of what it is that you're building. So to me, there's two major fields with technology. The first field of technology, which is where you fall, is, how do you make the thing do what it is that you want it to do? And the other end of technology, which is more of my field, is how do I translate that into something that is approachable and something that is relevant and usable by the person that's asking for that experience? And tailoring not just like how you're programming, but also like understanding like the greater vision or what it's trying to accomplish. It also gives you the flexibility to be creative and to problem solve, and not to subscribe to a single, I don't know what software engineers do. I'm terrible with that kind of stuff, but
okay. So are most of us.
Yeah. So I don't,
Which is what the channel is kind of here for. But
okay, that's a problem. But we can talk about that later. Being able to program something is wonderful. Being able to understand what the program is for and understanding what impact you want to create from it changes the way that you program. Right? Know your mission. Know your community.
I couldn't have said it better myself, and believe me, I've tried. Any other final thoughts or places that people can find you?
Those non-technical people out there that have things that could be powerful that they want to build, we need, strong engineers that can support us in these visions. So don't be afraid to be creative, and don't be afraid to, explore the boundaries of what you're able to do.
As Lao Tzu said, with patience, the most tangled cord may be undone. Lucia, thank you.